Hello and welcome to my BCM215 Playing with History Beta. Let's jump straight into it. The first feedback I want to talk about is from the pitch. One comment from the squad said that it would be a good idea to alter the structure of my DA. I took their thoughts on board and decided to make 2 animated videos to be put on YouTube. Part 1 is a structural approach to the topic of history-based video games, and Part 2 is the implications of these games. Here's the rough storyboard that will become my DA. Part 1 will begin with a little bit of an intro into something about how much I enjoy history games and why I've chosen the topic. Going into an introduction of what Part 1's all about. Then we'll jump straight into the structuralist discussion. We'll be talking about the different types of games and how they address history, using heaps of examples. We'll be listing different genres of the games, and then I'll list their history counterpart with it. This would create an example with quotes from people like Christopher Moore, who says, "In temporarily putting the real world variety there is, the player creates a new but fragile. To make my DA one that is defined by the rules of the game and inhabited by the players, I will use theorists to back up these characteristics and discuss whether history games fit the mold of games altogether. For example, the Magic Circle. With analytical resources such as these and others, such as the creation of virtual identity, I will come to the conclusion that all these history games are not divided by any of these characteristics, such as the fact that they're still multiplayer, they're still modded. So I will then ask the question, what makes them different? In this section, there will be a discussion about the setting, for that is what makes a history game different. I'll talk about how that helps the creation of the game and the playing of the game, as it adds an air of familiarity, and then I'll provide a series of examples within these genres discussed earlier in which games are very different. For example, Red Dead Redemption and GTA are made by the same people, but because of their settings we get a very, very different approach. Finally, I'll get to talk about whether these games are successful. This will be a discussion of their history and their success. In part 2, in my second video, I will do a brief recap video, introduce part 2 and the ideas about to be presented, and then I will go into what it's all about. I'll talk about utility. It'll be a discussion about why these games are good for us, the implications of part 1. In this part, we'll talk about the idea that video games are a way to remember the past. Primarily in this section, I'll be discussing Battlefield 1 as my example. Then I'll go on to talk about video games as education. From one of my betas, I got an example from Turkey, and I've got lots of sources and games that function as educational tools. Finally, I'll talk about actually playing these games, the user experience. Going into and experiencing the past is exciting and different, yet familiar and interesting. Together, these 2 parts will form my DA. I put these images on Twitter to get some feedback. The first response was from Sam, who says this is a great idea and a solid start. He then referenced me to another YouTube channel in order to pinch some constructive criticism they've already received in the comments. Now I've done this and I've found that animated videos such as this is loved by students, and people wish that they could have stuff like this in schools. Another comment was talking about how that this storyboard itself looked really good. However, I should probably do some outlines of the graphics I want. I've also mentioned on Twitter talking about using Skillshare to learn to animate. I got a response about Skillshare from Asher, who said, "Give it a crack. I got used Skillshare for a while and lost motivation, so make sure you stick to it." He gave me some other advice about how to use it, so that's so far a good idea.